I'd like to welcome you to Andy Farkas's Cult Films Workshop. I'm excited because I love these types of films, so I can't wait to see what he brings to this workshop. And with that, I give you Andy Farkas.
Hello, I am Andy Farkas, and I'm the author of various books, including The Big Red Herring, Sunsphere, and the forthcoming book, The Great Indoorsman, from the University of Nebraska Press. But at Washburn, I also teach a cult films class, a class that I first started teaching at the University of Illinois at Chicago. So I've been teaching cult films for a while now, and I've been going to cult films for much longer than that. So the thing that I would like to begin with is I started going to the Rocky Horror Picture Show when I was about 17 years old, I believe. And without realizing it, I was being introduced to the cult film world. And in a way, I already had been, because before I ever saw the Rocky Horror Picture Show, I saw a movie called Army of Darkness. And even though at the time I did not know about the Evil Dead series, of which Army of Darkness is actually the third movie, even though I did not know about that series, I saw Army of Darkness, and I loved it. And so I realized that these kinds of movies were the kinds of movies that I was going to be probably most interested in. And so then when I went to the Rocky Horror Picture Show, the first time I went, I just thought I was going to a movie. And some cult films that you go to are just going to be movies. Not every single cult film operates in the same way, and the audiences for various cult films don't operate in the same way. But one definition that I can give you for what a cult film is a movie that originally it did poorly at the box office, and later on gained a cult following. And so when I went to the Rocky Horror Picture Show, that was a movie that had that happen to it. Now, the Rocky Horror Picture Show rebounded pretty quickly. And it rebounded pretty quickly because it started to get shown at midnight again and again. And people realized that when they did that, the same people kept coming back to watch the movie. And so one of the things that we can think about with cult movies are films that originally did poorly, but then later on, through repeat showings, frequently late night showings, and then later on with video and streaming, ended up gaining a cult following. Other than the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and yes, Army of Darkness 2, movies like Brazil, which actually, like, its cult following was slow in going, as was Deathbed, The Bed That Eats, if anybody knows that film. Also, movies like Harold and Maude, The Thing, Highlander, The Big Lebowski, which originally did poorly at the box office, but then got quite a big following, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. But this is something that we frequently see. And so that is the definition people often know. And so I will have more definitions as we continue on, but I am going to stop here and show one of two movies that I will potentially be showing today. Both of them are on YouTube, so any of us can watch them at any time. But just in case, the second one is the one that I'm a little more afraid of in showing. But the first one is a movie called The New Tenants, which I would say meets a lot of different definitions for a cult film. So I'm going to show that now, and then when it's over, I'll come back and I'll talk to you some more. So now I will share my screen so you can, let's see here. All right. And so this is the new tenants.
No one gets out alive. Everybody buys the farm at some point, and usually in the most hideous, least photogenic manner. And every second in every country, in every city, in every hospital, someone is just giving up the ghost in some vile, shitting, farting, vomiting display. Just every orifice discharging at the exact same moment. Literally every second, someone is having their one final thought, which ought to be some sort of profound, oh, so that's what it's all about kind of revelation. But it's more often than not, I guarantee you, something like, no, I have so many regrets. Say a bomb goes off in a marketplace, detonated by some suicidal zealot who hates, I don't know, fruit or vegetables or local handicrafts. Viscera and gobbets of flesh and wet hanks of hair and teeth and splinters of bone are just shooting through airborne sprays of blood, like on those soft drink commercials where the lemon slices splash through the arc of soda in some slow motion orgasm of what it means to be refreshing. And every time it happens, it gets less tragic, not more. They just push it further and further in the newspaper. Or say the reactor down the river piece one day extrudes a plume of God knows what into the atmosphere. And, it's 8 seconds before anybody notices. But what do you know? The townspeople, they start to bleed from the eyes and their hair falls out. And the cancer wards just fill up. And nobody takes responsibility. Nobody even apologizes. And children are getting caught in factory machinery. And everybody's all like, no, not the children. The children are our future. The future of my next 3-pack of undershirts, maybe. China's burning enough coal to choke us all to death. Oh, and their food supply, which frankly is now our food supply, it's just one toxic surprise after another. No one has a fucking clue. Fish are fucked. Forget about fucking fish. You're never going to see another fucking fish as long as you fucking live. And the water supply is drying up. All of Africa has AIDS. And we are just fucked. We're just double fucked. Privacy is gone. Hey, Europe is all hamburger-eating fatzos and loose nukes. I mean, we're just fucked beyond all measure. And you tell me not to smoke while you're eating?
Are you done?
Yes.
Good. I hate it when you smoke, especially when I'm eating. You know this. You could show a hint of consideration.
Come on. You're eating preform meat from a stick. What is that? Snouts and eyelids? Anuses?
Okay.
All right, so shut up with that shit already. Come on.
You expecting someone?
No.
What's a woman supposed to do without flour?
I beg your pardon.
Who must be the new tenants? I need to borrow some flour.
Well, the last thing I baked was in 1987, so my relationship to flour is not all it could
She's
be.
my granddaughter. I always bake her cinnamon buns, and she's coming today. I have most of what I need. I just need a little extra flour.
Okay, but
Irene is her name. I always used to make her cinnamon buns when she was a little girl. It's what keeps us together.
we just moved in. Try downstairs because I'm sure that someone downstairs might have some flour.
Oh, but they're dead. They got shot with Jerry.
Jerry, the guy who lived here.
Yeah, didn't you hear about it? Oh, sure. They shot Jerry first, and then the Lawsons. Well, they were always stupid kind. They came up to see what the commotion was about, and they got shot in the head in their matching robes.
They did not tell us any of this when we signed the
The
lease.
3 of them were all laying over there, all shot in the head. Irene used to come down and visit Jerry a lot.
How much do you need?
I need about half, but you know what? I'll take the rest of it just in case. I'll bring the rest back later, I promise.
You know something? Don't worry about it. Here you go.
Thank you so much. Irene will be so happy. I usually use cake flour. It makes a better bun, but I'm just going to have to make do with what I have.
Where the hell did that come from?
It was in the kitchen cabinet. By the ketchup and chips.
Gross. You just gave her dead guy flour.
Sure you don't want any? There's nothing wrong with them.
Your dead guy chips? No, thank you. I guess I know where this came from.
And would you mind blowing your smoke the other way?
Such a pussy. You know I'm a smoker, yet I like to smoke.
It smells disgusting, and it's bad for me. Hello? Why should I risk cancer because you want to kill yourself with cigarettes?
Listen to you. You know you sound like, right?
Don't, Frank.
The tyrant of purity. What other of my filthy habits disgusts you, Peter? Tell me so I can begin to shape up. You know, this is exactly how that vegetarian Adolf Hitler started. You do know that Hitler was a vegetarian, right?
Oh, Jesus.
Come on, I thought you wanted to have a good time.
Fine. Smoke. A bout of throat cancer might finally shut you up.
There's my boy. You mind?
Jerry? Which one is Jerry? Neither. I'm Peter. He's Frank.
Are you getting at my wife?
We don't even know who your wife is, and Jerry's dead. We just found that out.
Irene? She comes down here all the time to see her grandma.
Irene.
Irene! My bitch of a wife!
Is that her grandma upstairs?
Probably. You know. Eat those buns out of her snatch.
What? Listen.
That's you, right? Amanda.
Listen, man, okay? Look around you, okay? We moved in here like yesterday. Okay, we moved in here together. Do you understand that? Together, we live here together. Okay, so neither of us have been getting at your wife, rest assured. As for Jerry, he got shot in the head, so he's dead. So you can't bash his head in either, okay?
I mean, people marry people for all sorts of things, you know, because he's smart, you know. What's wrong with that? I mean, what's wrong with that? The time she told me that the best thing that could happen to her was to go to Vienna. Yeah, so I bought the tickets for us to go. You know. She meant Venice. She said Venice. Oh, I made a mistake. You know, what's the big deal? You know, whatever. It's not like I killed somebody. No, Vienna's nice, right? I mean, it's pretty nice, right?
I think so. I don't.
But now she doesn't even want me to touch her. You know, I don't mean in bed. I mean, you know, touch her, like, you know, pat her on the shoulder. Hey, hey, pass me the salt or something. Here I am, defending my wife's honor. You know, I'm gonna kick the ass of the guy who, you know, somebody already beat me to it. I don't even know why I bother.
Jeez, what a story. Everything but the bloodhounds nipping at your rear end.
nothing.
Yeah, well, look at us. All we've got is a bunch of boxes.
Yeah. I guess it could be worse.
Yeah, so much worse. I mean, you're in every city, in every country, in every hospital. Someone's just.
Shut up, Frank. Should I try to be at the coffee maker? Maybe you want something stronger.
I tell you.
Yeah, think like that.
You must be the new tenants. I'm Zelko. Welcome to the building. You haven't by any chance found my kilo of heroin on the premises, have you? You can't even win that game, you know? It's the 7. Where was I? Oh, yeah, the heroin. Jerry, who used to live in this apartment, stole a very large amount of heroin from me. And we all know of Jerry's passing, so sad. But what really concerns me right now is the present location of my heroin. They didn't even mention it on the news when they reported the triple homicide that happened here. Get a break on the rent? You should have. Which leads me to believe that my stash still rests somewhere in the confines of this apartment. Your new apartment. Heroin, seen it? White powdery substance resembling flour. Something bubbling up in the memory banks, boys? No, really, no. Because it looked like you look like. Well, I could just shoot the two of you and then search the apartment. Expecting somebody?
Yeah, we're having a dance party. We're getting the place ready all day.
Shut up. Shut up.
Candy attitude.
Thank you. I tell him all the time.
You shut up, too!
Hey.
You shut up!
There's no need.
Why can't you just shut the fucking fuck up? That's pretty interesting what she was talking about, huh? Flour.
Yeah, her granddaughter's favorite cinnamon buns.
How much did you give it? How much?
We didn't know it wasn't flour. And I don't bake.
You're not telling me you gave it a whole fucking bag, did you? Fucking idiots. You know how much you idiots owe me now? You're so extremely dead.
Where was that? It was a box. A glass box. With blue, yellow crack. Ooh, John. Grandma.
Tonight is the last. Please don't think of the past. Every time we have kissed on the slide, tender smiles filled with sun, which were just meant for one. That's all gone, and we don't know why. Lived in vain, and a plain, sad refrain. That is all we have left here today. We can try to forget, but we'll always regret that we failed in that senseless way. Oh, but life must go on, though our love now has gone. And the smiles and the kisses too. I know we must part, but I feel in my heart the things we forgot to do. Tonight is the last. Please don't think of the past. Every time we have kissed on the slide, tender smiles filled with sun, which were just meant for one. That's all, and we don't know why.
All right, so that was The New Tenants. And before the New Tenants, I had you think about the definition that cult films are movies that just weren't really recognized when they first came out and later gained a cult following. However, with The New Tenants, it won the Academy Award for Short Film in 2009. So it was recognized. So why is it then that this could be a cult film? Well, there are a few things going on here that I can point out. For one, I doubt that if it was a full-length film, it ever would have won the Academy Award, or perhaps even been nominated. It does seem like stranger films are able to win in the short film category, but frequently not so much with full-length films. And so one of the things that we see in cult films is we frequently see movies that are strange. And in fact, when I teach the cult films class, my students frequently ask me if all of the movies in the class are going to be weird, and I just tell them yes, because that is pretty much the case. And so there is a strangeness here, seeing as how the beginning of the movie mostly seems like it's going to be almost a kind of domestic drama. This couple has moved into a new apartment, and they are perhaps, Peter is eating perhaps his first meal in the new apartment, while Frank is smoking and kind of complaining about the world. But that's what it seems like it's going to be. And then with each person who comes to visit them, more things get thrust upon us. So we have a kind of romantic story where there's, a problem with Vincent D'Onofrio, John's, with his relationship. And so it seems like maybe it will become the kind of movie where the couple helps this guy out because he's having so many problems. But then after that, the drug dealer comes in. And that is when we get our first death. And I would say that the way that this movie approaches death and murder also places it firmly within the cult film. I can't say genre really, because I don't know that cult is a genre necessarily, but we could say the cult category. And so another thing that we frequently see in cult films is a kind of transgression, where either one, we are rooting for the bad guys to some extent, or at least we're kind of on the bad guy side, to the point where those questions that are frequently not problematized in mainstream Hollywood films, who's the good guy and who's the bad guy, in cult films, they very much are. And so there is a transgression going on here, because not only does this movie have a pretty cavalier view of murder and killing, it also, after a while, I argue, starts to become funny in the film. And so I would say that that dark humor is something that you will frequently see in cult films, far more than you see in mainstream films. Now, certainly there is some of that. And if I get to the other movie that I'm going to show, it was a short made by Tim Burton. Tim Burton has plenty of dark humor, and most of his movies are considered pretty mainstream, although they definitely come out of the tradition of cult films. But transgression, weirdness, and dark humor, all of those things can be found in cult films. But another thing that you will also frequently see is genre hybridity. And that means that we aren't necessarily sure exactly what genre a cult film falls into. Earlier, I talked about Army of Darkness, and Army of Darkness itself is kind of horror, kind of fantasy, kind of Western, kind of slapstick comedy, and it's all of these things blended together. And I would say that this movie has that genre hybridity too. So for instance, again, we have a kind of domestic drama, and then there's like some aspects of a romance kind of movie, especially with John's relationship. But then there is also this. I make the argument that this film is at least partially a horror film. And here are a couple of ways to think about that. One of them is you find out that in this very apartment, not so very long ago, multiple people were killed. And now it's happening again. And that is exactly what happens in many different horror stories, horror films. That happens plenty of times. So that is one aspect. But here's another one. Horror frequently moves from the status quo to whatever it is that causes the fear, and then back to the status quo. And I would say that Frank's speech at the beginning, where he paints the world as being in a very dire situation, I would say that that's the status quo. And then we go through the horror part, because certainly when Jelko And I always feel like Kevin Corrigan, he sounds like he's doing a Christopher Walken impression to me. And somehow that's just how he talks. I don't understand how that's possible, but that's just the way it is. But anyway, when Jelko is standing there, it really seems like he's going to kill both of our main characters. And they end up getting out of it in a very lucky kind of way. And there are plenty of times, especially in the old slasher films, where whatever it is that stops the monster is far more luck than planning. And then at the end, we go back to the status quo again. Yes, the world is exactly, perhaps if you agree with Frank, the world is exactly the way that he described it, and we have returned to that. And so we have these various genres that are going on in this particular piece. But another thing that cult films are willing to do is they are definitely willing to innovate. Sometimes it is very much on purpose. Sometimes, indeed, it is accidental. But in this case, I think it is on purpose. And one of the reasons that I think that this movie seems so weird is because of the fact that everything moves so quickly. I think that if we had this slowed down, full feature-length version of this film, it probably wouldn't seem as odd, because different storylines would be developed more and we would get comfortable with them instead of everything hitting us so quickly. And so in this way, I would say this movie is playing with genre conventions. And one of the ways that it does that is by constantly yanking the rug out from underneath you. And so that's what you are frequently thinking about with this film. Now, it is perhaps too easy for me to use an Oscar winner. And so I have to talk about some other things here. For one thing, going back to my discussion earlier of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, when I went to the Rocky Horror Picture Show, one of the things that I ended up seeing that I had not necessarily ever seen before was the fact that people were dressed up like the characters as we were waiting in line to get into the theater. And in this way, we could say that there is a component of active celebration in a lot, not all, but in a lot of cult films. And this is how a movie like Star Wars can be considered a cult film. It is the way that people approach it. And so, whereas there are revivals of classic films, and people will go to the theaters and see them again and again, it is pretty rare. For instance, I would say when you go to see Citizen Kane at the theater when there is some revival of it, people aren't going to be dressed up like characters from Citizen Kane. In part because the costumes are people just wearing clothes from the time period and that's it. However, when you go to a cult film, you might see people dressed up like the characters. So there is that component of active celebration. There is another component is liveness. And so when we got inside the theater to watch the Rocky Horror Picture Show, not only did we watch the movie, but there are also people who recreate what is going on the screen at the same time in front of you. So you're watching the movie, you are then watching a recreation of the movie in front of you. And if you are only an audience member and you haven't gotten all dressed up and you are not one of the people who is doing one of the active like recreations of what's going on the screen, there's something for you to do too. And that is, when you are watching the Rocky Horror Picture Show, people have developed a second script where they shout lines out that play with various lines that are being said in the movie. So a very simple one, for instance, is at the beginning of one scene in the Rocky Horror Picture Show, There is a character named the criminologist who is on the screen. And if you are a person who knows the second script, you shout out, "I say that life is an illusion." And then if you have timed it correctly, because you have gone enough weeks in a row, as I did at one point, the criminologist on the screen says, "There are those who say that life is an illusion," and then you shout back, "I just said that." And that is the sort of thing that is going on. There is this liveness to the cult experience. And so, in other words, if people are shouting things out, and there are people who are recreating what's going on the screen, and there is this interplay, then we can say that this is not the normal experience that we expect when we go to the movies. In fact, if we go to the movies and somebody talks, normally we get pretty annoyed with them. But the cult experience is not like that at all. We could say that instead of the normal experience, cult experience is almost like kind of the punk rock aesthetic. And so consequently, you are not there to be polite. You are there instead to shout, sometimes over top of the movie, sometimes lines that react or set up lines in the movie. And so you are acting along with the film you are watching. So this is also very different. Now, here's the thing though. It is not complete chaos, and part of the cult experience, and using that word cult, is the fact that you memorize the second script, and normally it's not like somebody hands you a bunch of written pages, although there are some on the internet. But usually people don't just hand you a bunch of pages and say, memorize this by the next time you see the movie. No, it's not like that. Instead, you go to it and you notice what people are saying and you start picking up on the lines. And then you repeat the same lines every week when you go. And notice I say every week, because with something like the Rocky Horror Picture Show and other cult films too, we find that people go again and again to the same movie to have this experience that is different than the normal movie-going experience. And so this is the sort of thing that you end up seeing when you go to a cult film. Now, if you happen to think that you can just shout out any old thing, well, along with the people who are recreating what is up on the screen, you also have people who are kind of running the show. And if you just start shouting out whatever you want, they will come around and make fun of you to let you know that you are not doing the right thing. Now, this might sound weirdly intimidating, but I would say that there is a whole lot of irony in going to cult films. And that is why, and we will talk more about this later, that is why one of the things that is definitely the case is that a lot of cult films are considered bad by people who like mainstream movies, but they watch cult films and they're like, this is just awful. But I will talk more about that later. But to go back to people just shouting out any old thing, yes, there are people who will point out that actually you have no idea what you are doing, and they will make fun of you. Now, once you become known in that particular group, and once you show that you do know the second script, that is when you can start to add new things at different times. And so people who have been going for a while will start to add to a particular movie theater's experience of that particular cult film, which means that if you go to another theater, so for instance, I would go to University Plaza Cinemas in Kent, Ohio to watch the Rocky Horror Picture Show. But I found out that it was playing elsewhere. And so when I went elsewhere, yes, I knew the Rocky Horror Picture Show and I had gone to it when it was actually being performed and people were actually saying the lines, but you will find that it is slightly different everywhere you go. And so that is another thing, is that Although if you go to the same place, it will frequently be similar. It will not be exactly the same. And so that is something else that we see with cult films, is we see a slight variation depending on where you're going. But in the end, you will find that the people who go to these repeat showings are committed to them. Even though part of the Rocky Horror experience is making fun of the fact that you're going to the same movie every week again and again. So another one of the lines is, and I hope you will excuse me, but another one of the lines is you sing over top of one of the songs in Rocky Horror, "Let's see the same shit again." And that's what you are doing. Again and again, watching the same movie, doing similar things. And that is part of the reason why we use the word cult, because it is this repetition. But there is also a kind of rebellion, rebelling against the things that mainstream movies hold dear. And so that's why another thing that you saw in The New Tenants is you saw drug use, being shown in a kind of whimsical, wacky way. Like the person who saves the day has somehow eaten cinnamon buns made of heroin, and is obviously very messed up when she comes in and saves the day, perhaps not entirely knowing what she has done. Maybe she does, maybe not, we're not really sure. But again, this is part of the humor, and we see this in lots of different films. One of the older ones that people like to watch is Reefer Madness, for how ridiculous it shows pot smoking to be, which very obviously the people making that movie did not really seem to understand what they were making a movie about. But then you see Repo Man, where the people in the movie we are rooting for all talk about doing speed. And so this is something else we frequently see in cult movies. So I'm going to try, since we are all along these lines right now, I am going to try showing my other film. Again, it's on YouTube, so any of us can watch it at any time, but we will see if Disney shuts us down, since they're the ones who own the rights to this one. So let's find out. This is Tim Burton's movie, Vincent.
Vincent Malloy is 7 years old. He's always polite and does what he's told. For a boy his age, he's considerate and nice. But he wants to be just like Vincent Price. He doesn't mind living with his sister, dog, and cats, though he'd rather share a home with spiders and bats. There he could reflect on the horrors he's invented. And wander dark hallways alone and tormented. Vincent is nice when his aunt comes to see him, but imagines dipping her in wax for his wax museum. He likes to experiment on his dog, Abercrombie, in the hopes of creating a horrible zombie. So he and his horrible zombie dog go searching for victims in the London fog. His thoughts, though, aren't only of ghoulish crime. He likes to paint and read to pass some of the time. While other kids read books like Go, Jane, Go, Vincent's favorite author is Edgar Allan Poe. One night, while reading a gruesome tale, he read a passage that made him turn pale. Such horrible news he could not survive, for his beautiful wife had been buried alive. He dug out her grave to make sure she was dead, unaware that her grave was his mother's flower bed. His mother sent Vincent off to his room. He knew he'd been banished to the Tower of Doom, where he was sentenced to spend the rest of his life alone with the portrait of his beautiful wife. While alone and insane, encased in his doom, Vincent's mother burst suddenly into the room. She said, "If you want to, you can go out and play. It's sunny outside and a beautiful day." Vincent tried to talk, but he just couldn't speak. The years of isolation had made him quite weak. So he took out some paper and scrawled with a pen, "I am possessed by this house and can never leave it again." His mother said, "You're not possessed and you're not almost dead. These games that you play are all in your head. You're not Vincent Price, you're Vincent Malloy. You're not tormented or insane, you're just a young boy. You're 7 years old and you are my son. I want you to get outside and have some real fun." Her anger now spent, she walked out through the hall. While Vincent backed slowly against the wall, the room started to sway, to shiver and creak. His horrid insanity had reached its peak. He saw Abercrombie, his zombie slave, and heard his wife call from beyond the grave. She spoke from her coffin and made ghoulish demands, while through cracking walls reached skeleton hands. Every horror in his life that had crept through his dreams swept his mad laughter to terrified screams. To escape the madness, he reached for the door, but fell limp and lifeless down on the floor. His voice was soft and very slow as he quoted The Raven from Edgar Allan Poe. "And my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore."
So that is Tim Burton's Vincent. And also, I had to make sure to show you some of the other people who had worked on it, because you saw Stephen Chiodo's name. And Stephen Chiodo is one of the Chiodo brothers who went on to make another cult film called Killer Clowns from Outer Space. And so they work together on this early film, and then later on went on to make their own. And then they were much more known for effects and animation work later on. In fact, some people kind of consider Killer Clowns from Outer Space like their resume builder, so that they ended up with all of these other jobs doing that sort of work. But one of the things we also frequently see in cult films is an absolute willingness to be self-conscious of being a film. And so that is frequently different from mainstream films that want you to fall for the illusion that all of what you are watching is real. And so cult films aren't like that. And so in this case, for one thing, we have a character who's obsessed with Vincent Price. And Vincent Price is known for being in films. And of course, particularly horror films. So in that way, it is very self-conscious. But also, we could say that cult films frequently will very obviously make references to other films. I've been talking about the Rocky Horror Picture Show. The entire opening song, science fiction double feature, that song is doing nothing but referencing other science fiction and horror films. And in this case, we have references to House of Wax, which was a Vincent Price movie, and then the various Poe films that Vincent Price was in. And so we have movies that are willing to do that. So we will also find that frequently cult films, because they are low budget, more often than not always, but more often than not, they are going to be lower budget films, frequently will star actors who are either at the very beginning of their careers. So for instance, if you watch Leprechaun, you will see a very early career Jennifer Aniston. She looks a little different since she got a nose job after that movie. But you will see an early career Jennifer Aniston in Leprechaun. And in Vincent, we have Vincent Price, who would die in the 1980s. He was actually making another movie with Tim Burton when he died, called Edward Scissorhands. And we could say that really Tim Burton in general is absolutely influenced by the cult aesthetic, various types of the cult aesthetic, since we see plenty of darkness in this film, but then in his other films, we see, dark humor, we see weirdness, we see all of that kind of stuff that frequently is in cult films. Tim Burton is the one who broke through, right? So he kind of made it through. We can say another one like that is Terry Gilliam, who also broke through. But Vincent is absolutely celebrating its, like the fact that it is a movie that is about movies and reactions to movies. So it is very intertextual, very self-conscious, and has no problem with that. Another thing is that we have a kind of innovation here, because there's no dialogue in this movie. And instead, the entire movie is narrated. Now, that connects it a little bit, but not exactly, to one of the genres that it's dealing with, which is kids' movies and various kids' animation, so like television and stuff like that. But it is a kids' movie and horror at the same time, since we have various things that we see in kids' movies and then also various things that we see in horror, and this collision of things that we would see again in A Nightmare Before Christmas with Tim Burton. So we have that. And then the other thing is that it is very much highly stylized and based at least a little bit in a nostalgia for old horror films. Because when Tim Burton is making this, certainly the slasher movies are on the rise. And so that is the kind of horror film being made. And so the kind of horror films that Vincent Price used to be in, those aren't nearly as popular anymore, and they're not happening nearly as much. And that sort of nostalgia for these movies and for a kind of, a different time in movie making, that's another thing that is very much going on in this movie. And we see that in cult films too. There is something that I haven't exactly hit on yet. I've brought it up a little bit, but now is the time when we absolutely have to confront it, which is, even when you are at the Rocky Horror Picture Show and various other cult films, especially Plan 9 from Outer Space, people talk about the fact that, for instance, there are things in the Rocky Horror Picture Show that we could say are not the best filmmaking. And then when you get to Plan 9 from Outer Space, you have just straight up bad filmmaking. However, by saying that, we have to ask ourselves what good filmmaking is. And then perhaps the question that we ask is, why would anyone watch a bad movie when there are a good number of good movies out there to watch? So one of the things that I do in my cult films class is I teach a diagram that is just a check mark. And the check mark, at the very highest point, I put great movies. At the medium point of the check mark, I put mediocre movies. But no, that's not where it goes. Mediocre movies go at the bottom of the check mark. And the middle, so second place, maybe for some people, and then for others, definitely not, this would actually be first place, are terrible movies. Now, why in the world would anybody want to watch a terrible movie? And why would I say that those are better than mediocre movies? Well, mediocre movies, when you watch them, they bounce off of you. You see them, they happened, you walk away, and there's really no reason to ever watch them again. Why? There are a lot of mediocre movies, and they all kind of give you the same feeling. They all have the same sort of effect. Terrible movies, on the other hand, do things that we would never, ever predict. We would never guess what they are going to do, or what, after we have watched them, we would never guess that that's what they would have done. And so consequently, even though if we go by mainstream movie standards, these movies don't measure up to great films. If we approach those movies in a different way, we find that they can affect us just as much, if not more, than great films. And it is those effects, those experiences that we end up having and that stick with us that become important, and mediocre movies don't have that power. We're done with them as soon as they're over. Whereas a bad movie, you might again and again be like, oh man, I can't believe this. You have to see this movie for this one weird section, or all of these different weird sections. Just before I gave this talk today, I happened to be looking through some articles, and I found exactly this thing, an article written about the 1995 film Mortal Kombat, and the person was arguing for it as a movie that is so terrible, you absolutely have to see it. And so I would say that terrible movies can surprise us. And with that surprise, they end up sticking with us. So that is one thing. Now, there is a particular approach to so-called bad movies. And that approach is called paracinema. So we can say it's the paracinematic approach. Now, what is this? One of the ways that we can approach a bad movie with the paracinematic mindset is by pretending as if everything in the movie was done on purpose. Because remember, all of the stuff that makes the movie seem real in a mainstream movie that is considered good, all of the stuff that makes that movie seem real is constructed, meaning it's not actually real, it's an illusion. And so we can say that the paracinematic approach is to say something like Plan 9 from Outer Space, everything in that movie is done on purpose. Now, when you go to see a mainstream film, you are being asked to get caught up in the illusion. You are not in a bad film. So when you watch Plan 9 from Outer Space, you don't go to it and think, oh, look at how incompetent Ed Wood is. Instead, you ask yourself, why did he make the movie like this? Now, let me be clear. This is a viewing tactic. It is not what Ed Wood necessarily meant. In fact, I feel confident in saying he thought that he was making a sci-fi horror film, and that it was doing the things that mainstream films do. But if you approach it with the paracinematic mindset, what you end up with is you end up with a film where you do not get caught up in the illusion. So then what are you left with? Since the actors are not natural actors, the characters are ridiculous or dismissible, very simply. So what do we do with this? At one point in the film, there is a character who is an alien who starts talking about humans and how humans are so stupid. And the reason that he thinks they are stupid is because they are violent. And he talks about how humans have already come up with the atom bomb and the hydrogen bomb. And then he says that humans will next come up with solaranite. And solaranite is a weapon that will more or less make it, and so all of the light emitted by the sun will explode, and the sun itself will explode, and this will be a weapon that humans develop. And so why would you present this material this way? Well, there have been plenty of movies throughout time that were against violence. There are plenty of artworks that were against violence and books. And yet, violence continues on. And so this time, so says the paracinematic approach to this movie, this time, we don't want you to get caught up. We're just going to come out and tell you what this movie is about. And so this is why I think of the paracinematic approach being to Hollywood what Bertolt Brecht and his epic theater is to Stanislavski. So the quick explanation for those things is that the Stanislavski method of acting is, if you were going to play a police detective, you go and hang out with police detectives and see what they're like. And then you bring that with you to your performance. Brecht, on the other hand, did not want you to get caught up in the illusion. And so he did as many things as possible using something called the alienation effect, so you didn't get caught up in the action of the play. But instead, you were distanced from it, and instead of getting caught up in it, you were able to analyze the material in front of you, and then also you were able to learn from it. And so that is what Brecht was doing as a kind of reaction against the Stanislavski method. And I would say that people who think of bad movies in the paracinematic way, they think of them in a similar way. So they are approaching this in a similar way to what Brecht was doing in comparison to Stanislavski. I would say that watching bad movies, not only can they really affect us because they do things that we don't expect, but also, along with affecting us like that, we can approach them in a completely different way using a different viewing tactic. And so no longer do we want to be lulled by the illusion of the story, but instead we want to be distanced from it. And so that is something else. Earlier, though, I brought up the punk rock aesthetic, and I would say that something similar happens with those who follow the paracinematic approach. And so we could say that frequently punk rock itself is like, the musicians aren't always the best musicians, but instead it's the experience that you end up having by listening to them, even though their musicianship isn't as good as non-punk rock bands. I would say that the same thing happens with the paracinematic approach. I would say that it is that effect that we are going for. All right, so I have talked a lot about cult films today. I do not know if there is a chat for there to be questions, but I am certainly open to questions. But otherwise, I would say that in the end, the Rocky Horror Picture Show influenced me greatly. And I would say that it has influenced quite a lot of people into the world of cult films, because it hits so many of the various traits that we find in different cult films. And in the end, we can say, if you think that I haven't given you one definition of what a cult film is, it is because there is not one definition. And that's why so many different films can be considered cult films. And again, going back to the word cult, we can say that the argument over what is a cult film and what isn't is part of the entire cult film scene. All right, so whatever questions you have for me, I'm happy to answer if there are any.
If there are any questions, feel free to write them in the chat, either in Zoom or on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch. They've been quiet, Andy.
Well, yeah, I wasn't sure if I should save enough time for questions at the end or not, but I decided that I would give it a shot.
I think it's great. No, I really enjoyed your presentation. I really enjoyed. I love cult films as well, and I really like the way you talked about bad movies. That really hit home for me as well. So, well, if there are no more questions, then we can go ahead and sign off, and we'll see everybody for the awards at 5:30.
Thank you for everybody out there, and thank you for having me, Matt. So
thank you very much. I really appreciate you doing it. It was awesome, and look forward to doing more stuff with you in the future.
Absolutely.